When a power struggle starts to emerge in your classroom, it can be a nerve-wracking experience. Let's talk about what to do and what not to do. Well, welcome back to the Teach for the Heart podcast, where we tackle teaching challenges from a biblical perspective. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. Today, I have Amanda with us, one of our Teach for the Heart team members and Teach for the Heart Plus mentors. Amanda, thanks for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here.
So today we're talking about this question of what do we do when there are power struggles? And in particular, we want to talk about how to avoid the power struggle escalation without abdicating our authority, right? How do we maintain it? And I was thinking about this. One of the reasons that prompted me to talk about this was I was recently working with a school and I saw this scenario, and I actually saw it in a couple different classrooms with different teachers but there was this one particular scenario where a teacher was asking a student to do something and the student was kind of refusing to do it in the middle of class. And the teacher was, doing their best to be insistent and not just back down, but it really escalated pretty quickly. And the student actually ran away and was hiding. And it was like, oh my word. And so as we were reflecting on this, we were trying to think about, man, was there something that could have been done differently? And I was thinking how this was such a great example of why we really want to try to avoid power struggles, right? Because they typically just don't end well. Have you ever seen that happen, Amanda?
Oh yeah. Um, as teachers, when we have a classroom that runs really well and the students always listen to us and they follow everything that we say, it's very easy to get in this mindset of everything I say has to go, and it's very easy to develop dominance in the classroom. And dominance is not what you want or what you need; it's authority. So it's definitely very easy to fall into that. I mean, I know me personally, I have before in the classroom where I have found myself starting to get angry because things weren't going the way that I wanted them to go, but it was just more of a dominance thing rather than having authority in the classroom. So it's a very easy trap to fall into as a teacher.
Yeah. And I think later I want to kind of circle back and talk more about that idea of what does right authority look like,
Mhm.
right? But particularly if we ever find ourselves getting in this power struggle in that moment where we're kind of in a fight with another student, not really a fight, but yeah, kind
Yeah.
of, right? Like we're trying to say we're doing this, I'm not, and it's escalating. And especially if it's happening in front of other students, that is just not a good scenario, right? That is not going to end well. But as I thought about it too, I think though, so what you said was very interesting, right? We need to have authority still. So we can't just abdicate and completely capitulate either, right? There's a danger of that, of just being like, okay, you can do, you don't have to listen. That could have
Mhm.
danger too. First of all, we're going to talk about what to do when you're actually in a power struggle. Like it has happened, you're in the middle of it, what to do. And then we're going to kind of circle back around and talk about, well, how can we avoid it? How can we have the right demeanor so that this happens less often, which
Yeah.
is obviously ideal. So in a power struggle though, if we are literally in that moment where you're saying something and a student's like, "Nope, I'm not doing it." We need to do two things, right? We need to de-escalate the power struggle, keep it from getting worse, but do so while maintaining our authority, right? Without just
Mhm.
completely giving in or being like, okay, and kind of losing that ground. So before we talk about exactly how to do that though, I was thinking, Amanda, and you were sharing some thoughts about what's happening in the student's mind. So it's important, I do think, to realize what's going on in their mind when they're in a power struggle with you. And I mean, they're not thinking clearly, right? They're responding very emotionally, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, because I don't think any student goes into the school day thinking, "I can't wait to fight with my teacher."
Not normally. Maybe on
Hopefully not.
occasion, but
Yeah, but whenever a power struggle is happening, um, it's because they're scared of a consequence that may happen. They're disappointed in themselves. If something happened in front of their peers, especially as they start to get older, they could be really embarrassed of being called out like that in front of everybody. And it could also be the flight or fight response. And because they are inside of the classroom, they can't necessarily take flight and run off, hopefully. And so they tend to think, I have to fight instead. That's my only option. I can't run off right now. I have to fight. And It's not just because they're a bad kid. Sometimes even the best of kids argue with things, but with you being that authority figure, you have to be mature enough in your thinking that, okay, I need to do what's best in this situation. I need to choose a response that is going to nurture that child, even though sometimes that nurturing can be holding true to a discipline. That doesn't mean just pat them on the back and lead them over to a quiet space in the room. That could be it, but um, you need to be mature enough to know I need to nurture this situation in order to de-escalate it so we can move on from this. And as that authority, you're choosing that responsibility. You're choosing your response to the situation. Again, not to establish dominance over that student and that class, but to help it and to help move on.
Right. And not because we can take this personally, right? Sometimes, especially because their emotions are high, our emotions can get high and we can be like, get really upset. But we need to kind of just pray and ask God and just real quick in that moment, God, help me
Yeah.
stay calm, right? And recognizing this student is not responding maturely, but I'm the adult and I need to respond maturely, right? And
Yeah.
also recognizing, you just talked about how the student is upset, responding emotionally, embarrassed, fight or flight, all these things are going on. This
Mhm.
is probably actually not the time to solve this. Whatever caused this little disagreement that's now escalating, um, this is something I've learned just in life too, right? When emotions are high, we rarely are going to be able to solve it. So giving it
Yeah.
some time, giving it some space and circling back is normally the way you want to go. So one method I think that can help, or one just practical way of what this could look like, is just simply making a statement to show that student, and actually it's almost more for the rest of the class, that this is not okay and you're not agreeing with what's happening. But then saying basically, I'm going to deal with this later. So, for example, you could say something, let's say you're getting in this thing and say, you're asking a student to put something away or to stop doing something. And they're basically, instead of just doing it, they're like, no, I'm not. You could simply, and you're kind of getting into this back and forth, they're not doing it. You could say something like, okay, this is not okay. We're going to have to talk about this later. Or you might even say, this is not okay. We're going to have to talk to Principal Jones about this later. But right now we're in the middle of class. So let's get back. Something like that, where you're just kind of cutting off the argument, depending on the age
Mhm.
of your student and the situation, and just saying, but you're telling the whole class, I'm not just accepting this or letting this go, but we're going to move this conversation. We're going to pick this up at a more appropriate time without the audience, right? We're not going to have the audience then. We're not going to have it. We give it time for tempers to cool and to circle back. And it might just be a simple conversation then, or it might involve consequences. It really depends on the situation and what's happening right there. Amanda, do you have any kind of thoughts on that? Or I also think, though, I don't know if you have any other examples of situations, because that, in my mind, that situation is more for something where like a student's refusing to do what you said. And you're basically like, okay, I'm not going to insist you do it right now because that's not happening. We're gonna come back to this later. But I know there's also situations where you've got younger kids that are really mad, and
Mhm.
that looks a little different because you've got to calm that down. You can't just walk away because they're not going to just move on. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. It's a new year, and that means brand new resources from the Herzog Foundation for Christian Educators. Their full calendar of events is now live at herzogfoundation.connect.space. The Herzog Foundation Institute offers free training events designed specifically for educators like you. In partnership with organizations like Answers in Genesis and the Museum of the Bible, these trainings provide hands-on strategies, biblical resources, and practical classroom tools to help you integrate faith and learning every day. And the best part, they are completely free for you and your school or homeschool group. Whether you're looking for fresh inspiration for your classroom or professional development to grow your ministry, the Herzog Foundation is here to help. Find an event near you at herzogfoundation.connect.space. Now back to our conversation.
Yeah, when it comes to littler kids, there's definitely different ways to de-escalate things. Counting down, telling them to, sniff the flowers, like take a deep breath, hold it, blow the petals away. There's all those different sorts of tips and tricks. But when you when you do take that moment to de-escalate the situation, that's not only helping that one student who is really hyped up right now, but it's also letting the whole class know that you care about that student enough to bring it down, to stop whatever's happening, but then also you going back to the rest of the class and moving on from that situation and going back to the teaching or whatever you were doing, that also lets the class know that, okay, I still care about them. Like, everyone is my priority. We're not taking 10 minutes out of our 30-minute class period to focus on this one student, because that can get real frustrating to students, especially if the students love art class and they come to art class just once a week for 30 minutes. It's their favorite week or favorite class of the week. And the teacher has to always stop to handle this one student for a third of the class time. When you're able to just stop it, put an end to it, and move on and focus on the rest of the class, it'll definitely mean a lot to the rest of the class that you're able to see that and give them the attention that they need.
Yeah. I think this is also a place where if this is something happening regularly with a particular student, it's probably also a good idea to have a conversation with your administrator. And I
Right.
realize not all administrators are as equally supportive, but if you have a student, the scenario you were saying where you're finding that you are spending big chunks of time with that student and uh, despite your best efforts to de-escalate, you're still spending too much time at the cost of the rest of the class. That is where it is an admin's responsibility
Yeah.
to get involved because they need to protect your class time. You cannot deal with one individual student and the rest of the class. And so, like I said, not every admin will do that, but I want you to know as a teacher that is the admin's responsibility and they should be involved. So go to them, ask them for help, assume that they will. Like, don't assume that they won't if you haven't even asked for some help there. But yes, absolutely, just trying to get back on track just as quickly as possible. And then, like I said, circling back with that student, depending on the situation and how much was said, and if you're like, okay, we can just move on, or if it's like, no, this really was not okay and we really do have to deal with it, circling back after class, a simple see me after,
Mhm.
well, we're going to talk about this after class, or circling back or scheduling a conversation with the principal, like whatever needs to happen from there.
Yeah. If it is a situation where there's a pattern with a certain class or certain students, then you probably do and you should seek help from your administrators, because then it's not just, this is a power struggle. This student is there's obviously something going on to where the student is knowingly every time doing this in my class, and something else needs to happen.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that brings up such a good point, right? If this is just the one offs, they might happen. People have a bad day, just something goes wrong. But yeah, whenever you're having a pattern, there's something deeper. And so you have to deal with each individual situation, but we also should be looking underneath and trying to uncover that root cause too. So there's some thoughts about dealing with it when it happens in the moment. What do I do? I'm deer in the headlights, so hopefully next time you won't be quite so deer in the headlights. But let's talk for a little bit about preventing struggles. And Amanda, a little earlier you were talking about being authoritative without being domineering, right? And so let's take
Yeah.
just a minute and talk about what does healthy authority look like, especially from a biblical perspective, right? Because God has given us authority in our
Mhm.
classroom, but we want to demonstrate the kind of authority God has, right? How does God get, we are supposed to reflect him, right? To everyone, but particularly to our students. So what does that loving, but firm, authoritative, but not domineering authority look like? Amanda, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it may be easier to think, well, what does that not look like?
True.
And there's many examples in the Bible of different people who had dominance in a situation. Like, Pharaoh, he had dominance over that whole area, and who was going to stay alive, right? And then there was King Saul. Whenever he got really jealous of David, he had dominance in that situation and made some not good choices. King Nebuchadnezzar, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees with Jesus Christ in the New Testament, they were showing their dominance in those situations, and those all led to poor choices because their pride got in the way of things. And dominance is a power over. situations and over people and over a classroom, whereas authority is power to something. Whenever you have authority, you have the power to change something. You have the power to love something. You have the power to nurture something. It's not just power over it, but you have the power to make a difference. And that can sometimes be like an under the radar thing in the way that you plan your pocket phrases or your classroom management plan. If if somebody were to look at it, the students may be like, "Oh, well, she didn't know that, I was getting away with this." But really, it's part of your warning system or like your nonverbal cues or your nonverbal warnings where you would walk by somebody and just kind of tap their shoulder or tap their desk where their name wasn't blown up really big on the board with a check mark and a red thing, or they didn't have to do the walk of shame and clip down. There's lots of ways to still hold authority, but to not make a huge deal about it and to make it, put your name in big bright lights in the classroom. And even when you're dealing with parents, because you can definitely have a power struggle when you're dealing with parents as well. That's not what the topic is today, but a little side note. Again, that's not power over that conversation. That's having the power to make a change, to make things better in that relationship with that parent.
Yeah, so many good thoughts there. And as you were talking, one thing that occurred to me was I think a lot of times when we get in that dominant or domineering situation, a lot of those examples you give, the person is afraid of losing their power, right? And
Yeah.
that's a lot of times what causes people to then abuse it, right?
Yeah.
So as believers, we know that our authority in the classroom is God given. So we actually can't lose it. We have it, right? And
Yeah.
we need to then display it in a God honoring way. So actually having that confidence that God has given me this authority and I need to use it wisely, I need to use it in a
Mhm.
loving, kind, compassionate way, can actually help us avoid. So if you've ever find yourself in that fear, like I'm afraid, that's not going to lead us the right way. Fear of losing even respect, authority, any of that, not good. We need to kind of be confident and go from there. And I think the fruit of the spirit is always such a great guide. And these are things that God has to produce in us. It's his fruit of his spirit. But whenever we're unsure, how should I respond? Well, am I being loving, right? Joyful, peace, kindness, patience, gentleness, goodness, self-control. I skipped one or two. But those things, okay, is that what I'm displaying? That's God honoring, right? And I think that that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Th- There's so much more we could say here, but the second thing that came to my mind on preventing power struggles was on a much more practical note, and that is having a classroom management plan, right? So when we don't know how we're going to handle something, um, and we're really inconsistent, and sometimes we come down hard and sometimes we don't, that kind of results in more pushback, more power surges from kids because the power dynamic is like really unknown. And so there's kind of like a fight for it. And so having a classroom management plan where we've thought ahead of time, this is how I'm going to deal with stuff. This is what I'm going to do. And then I'm really consistent. It helps you be more calm in how you address stuff. So you're not inadvertently causing power struggles. And then it also just creates this environment where kids know what to expect. And it doesn't mean they'll never power surge or be having a bad day or whatever, but it's going to happen a lot less often. If there's kind of just that understanding and everyone's on the same page. Do you have any thoughts on that part, Amanda?
Yeah. So having a classroom management plan is so important because when you're fickle in your management styles and your disciplines, uh, the students could potentially argue to get you to change your mind or the method that you're using because they've seen it happen before. Staying consistent is so important. Classroom management commandment number 5 is deal with problems consistently because it's it's not so much you have to do this the same way every single time. It's I'm setting this example of this is what is happening. This is how we will handle it. So there's no questions about this. This is what's going to happen. We can now move on to other things. And when you are wishy washy with how you handle things, the students pick up on that and they'll know. oh, I can maybe act this way and I can get a different outcome. Or if we say this, this will change how she thinks about this later. But if you're always consistent, there's not going to be any of that questioning with the students. They'll know what they know, what you know.
Yes, absolutely. You said it perfectly. So there's way more we could talk about, but as we wrap up today, let me just kind of recap some of the key things we talked about. Preventing power struggles by having healthy authority that's not domineering or concerned with dominating everything. We talked about having a classroom management plan and how important that is. And by the way, if you say, okay, yes, I need help with that, that is exactly what we help teachers with in Classroom Management 101. So if you head to teachfortheheart.com/CM101, you can get the information and join us there. We also have a free training called How to Reduce Disruptions that kind of gives an overview of how the system works. So that's a great place to start as well. You can get that at teachfortheheart.com/free. And then we talked about when you're in the moment in a power struggle, you didn't want to be here, but you are, and you're arguing. And now what? Kind of de escalating, the goal being, I want to de escalate the power struggle while maintaining authority and saying something simple, just saying, hey, this behavior is not acceptable. We're going to have to talk about it later, and kind of put a pin in it. And you can circle back at a time when people are more calm. We also talked about ways to kind of just help students to just take a deep breath, calm their emotions as well. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. It has been brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. All views and opinions are our own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Herzog Foundation. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like, subscribe, all the things so that you can be sure to see more of them. And we encourage you to share it with another teacher who you think would benefit as well. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to being with you again soon. In the meantime, teacher, remember, God is at work through you and in you, and He's using you to make a difference. Keep your eyes on Him and teach for the heart.